Mr. President.
The Democratic whip.
Mr. President, on Tuesday evening, President Biden delivered his first State of the Union message to Congress and to the American people. His remarks were timely, strong, and statesmanlike. He touched on many topics. I think his message really boiled down to two profound questions. How do we protect democracy in other nations, particularly in the Ukraine, which is now entering the second week of a horrific and unprovoked invasion by Russian forces? And then he asked, how can we protect and preserve democracy here in America? Dictators like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping want the world to believe that democracy is nothing more than chaos and gridlock. The people of Ukraine are showing the world just how wrong these despots are. I speak to you today from the comfort and safety of the Senate chamber of the United States of America in Washington, D.C., on a beautiful spring-like day. But I have to reflect for a moment of what life must be like at this very moment in Kyiv, in the Ukraine. What it must be like in Lviv. Those are two cities in Ukraine that I've visited, where bombs are raining down on innocent people, children, women, men, who are losing their lives because Vladimir Putin believes that he can restore the Soviet Union to its borders. We've all seen the videos, the Ukrainian grandmother, armed with nothing more than sunflower seeds and courage, confronting Russian soldiers. We've seen ordinary Ukrainian men and women, teenagers, taking up arms, making Molotov cocktails, building barricades, taking down highway and road signs to confuse the invading Russians, even laying down their lives to stop Russian tanks and convoys. In the back of my mind, I'm sure I'm thinking what many Americans are thinking. Could I do the same thing? Could I bring together the courage at this moment to stand up and fight if my home is at stake, my family is at stake, my country is at stake? The Ukrainians are answering that message every minute of every day. Their courage and unity in the face of this Russian barbarity is inspiring the world. For months, President Biden, Secretary of State Tony Blinken, others in the Biden administration have worked behind the scenes to revitalize the NATO alliance. That critical alliance emerged after the last great land war in Europe in 1945, from the allies who came out of it and said, never again. We will stand together to stop any invader against the NATO coalition, the NATO alliance. Biden administration has worked behind the scenes to remind this alliance that there comes a moment when you have to bring to this alliance the courage and direction to stand for the kind of democracy which we are all committed to. 2 years ago, we had a president who took Putin's word over the assessment of America's own intelligence agencies, and he threatened to pull out of the United States' participation in NATO. Today, we have a president who actually shared U.S. intelligence with our allies to show Putin for the liar that he was from the very start. And NATO is more unified today, thank you, Vladimir Putin, for that, than it's ever been since the Cold War or the end of World War II. In fact, nations that are not formally part of NATO, Sweden, Finland, for example, have stepped up in concert with the NATO alliance to stand our ground, to protest what's happening in Ukraine, and to protect Europe, even Switzerland. Switzerland, famously neutral in all major conflicts, has come out of its neutrality and made it clear that they too stand against the Putin invasion. In his State of the Union address, President Biden urged Congress to approve billions of dollars in emergency military and humanitarian assistance for Ukraine. Sign me up. I'll vote for that in a second, and I hope it comes soon. We need to agree on an aid package without delay and get it to the President as quickly as possible, not just for the humanitarian purpose, but for the purpose of showing American unity with the resistance in Ukraine. Ukrainian ordinary citizens are dying today because of Vladimir Putin and the bombs and missiles he's launching. And as in every war, innocent Ukrainians will soon be facing greater suffering, greater hunger, even starvation. In the year 2022, is it imaginable that this is happening in Europe? We must rally the world to support those still in the Ukraine, assist our allies and neighboring nations who are housing and feeding Ukrainians who have fled their homeland. They estimate 800,000 to 1 million Ukrainians have left the country to find safety nearby. Once again, let me thank the people of Poland. They have been opening their doors to the Ukrainians for many years, and now they're being called on in an extraordinary way to harbor these refugees and to take care of them at this moment of need. They are fleeing Putin's war. Their numbers are growing dramatically. Some have suggested a humanitarian airlift is a possibility. I don't want to rule that out. Let's explore that and see whether that is the best way to provide relief to those still in Ukraine facing Putin's attack. President Biden also promised to form a high-level task force to enforce U.S. sanctions against Putin, sanctions against Russia's political elites, and sanctions against the corrupt oligarchs. That always brings a cheer here in America because people think that these folks who have been engaged in a kleptocracy in the name of personal greed should be held accountable. And the thought that they are shopping in New York City or buying luxury condos and apartments in London or harboring their yachts in any civilized country is disgusting. They need to pay a price. And we shouldn't just freeze their assets. We ought to seize their assets and hold them to rebuild Ukraine and the devastation that the Russians are causing. Putin wants to be a czar. He and his cronies have become a pariah. We will support Ukraine, but we also have work to do to strengthen our own democracy. We also have to remember that the bordering nations, not just Poland, the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, are especially vulnerable to Russian aggression. They, as members of the NATO alliance, know that they have friends at their back. But we've got to reinforce that to the people of those small countries who worry about their very survival. Let's take a look at home. As the President said, we finally moved to a safer direction with the pandemic. What a relief it was to go to the State of the Union address and not wear a mask. Following doctors' orders, I might add, we listened to the medical experts who told us it's safe now not to be wearing a mask unless you're in a particular category of people. So most of us enjoyed one of the first public gatherings on a political nature where we were without masks and relieved to be so. We need to get back to our normal routines. We need to get our kids back in school, all of them, as quickly as possible. We've added 6 million new jobs last year, an all-time record. Things are good and positive, but inflation still is haunting this nation. Wages are up, inflation is up, but it's not just our nation. Inflation is a global problem. COVID-19 constricted the economy of the world. We are now emerging from it with new jobs and new businesses and new appetites and new consumption. It's all good, but the cost of it is inflation. I trust that we can bring this under control soon. Inflation is real. It's eating away at families' wages and savings and their faith in the future. When people work hard and can't get ahead, that's not just an economic problem. That can be a threat to our democratic spirit because it can open the door to anti-democratic demagogues. In his State of the Union address, President Biden laid out a plan to help American families afford big-ticket items that are essential. Restore the enhanced child tax credit. Help parents raise their kids and themselves out of poverty. Help families with quality, affordable daycare, childcare. Expand family and medical leave so workers don't have to choose between caring for an ailing member of their family or terminally ill parent and keeping their jobs. Make mental health care more affordable and accessible. Expand veterans' health benefits to cover more cancers and other service-related health conditions. And make prescription drugs more affordable by letting Medicare negotiate the price for medication. Just one simple thing seems to be so popular across this country. Cap the monthly cost of insulin at $35. $35. There are some 8 million people suffering from diabetes in this country, and of course their families are pulling for them every day. Think of all the lives that could be improved if insulin was affordable. If a fourth or a half of those who are diabetic have to now ration their insulin and risk their health, that's just wrong in a great nation. We should have insulin at affordable prices, and $35 a month is that. It's an outrage that insulin has been priced countless times to more than $300 a vial. As we support the Ukrainian people in their immense courage, I hope we'll also find the courage to protect America's future. Mr. President, I'd like to ask you that this statement I'm about to make be placed at a separate part in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, when it comes to the American labor movement, I selfishly say all roads lead to Chicago. At the turn of the 20th century, workers from all walks of life, from every corner of the globe, joined together in support of a simple but profound belief: an injury to one is an injury to all. Few leaders have embodied that philosophy of solidarity and mutuality better than Tom Balanoff, president of the Service Employees International Union, Local 1 in Chicago. If you're a worker in Illinois, a service worker anywhere in America, there's a good chance you know Tom. He's devoted his life not only to building a strong labor movement, but a more inclusive one. Now Tom's retiring from his post as president of Local 1. Though his leadership will be missed, he leaves behind an amazing legacy. He helped build a global labor movement led by essential workers. I'm talking about janitors, security officers, airport staff, nursing home and home health care workers who reclaimed their power in the workplace. As president of Local 1, Tom Balanoff transformed that chapter into one of the most influential forces in the American labor movement. Every step of the way, he held true to the chapter's progressive roots. Formed in Chicago in 1921, Local 1 was the first racially integrated union in America, bringing together immigrant janitors from across the globe fighting for better working conditions. From that moment on, SEIU has been synonymous with merging the fight for workers' rights with the fight for social equality, and Tom has carried that legacy to a new height. He's been a steadfast champion of racial equality, gender equality, and protecting the rights of immigrant workers. And he's assembled the most diverse leadership team in SEIU's history. Importantly, Tom's commitment to leading a socially conscious labor movement is steeped in a proud family tradition. It began when Tom's grandfather, James Balanoff, immigrated to America from Bulgaria and found work in a live chicken shop on Commercial Avenue in Chicago. Since then, each generation of the battling Balanoffs has been grounded in a commitment to defending the rights of working people in and outside the workplace. The Balanoff family notes with pride that both Tom's father and grandfather attended the 1937 Memorial Day massacre, where police opened fire on unarmed protesters at the gates of the Republic Steel Company in South Chicago, killing 10 men, injuring scores of others. If the police had hoped to fracture union solidarity, that massacre had just the opposite effect on the Balanoff family and so many others. The Balanoffs have stood by workers through every major economic shift of the past century. Tom's father, James Jr., organized steel workers at a time when manufacturing was the dominant industry in America and eventually rose to be president of the largest steel workers union in America, Local 1010 in East Chicago, Illinois. Tom has been helping lead the charge for justice for all since he was in the middle school middle school, when he and his siblings were the only white kids in class to protest segregation. By the time he was ready to follow in his family's tradition of union activism, America's economy was going through a dramatic shift. Factories closing, good-paying union jobs disappearing, shipped overseas. As more and more Americans left the factory and found new opportunities in airports, hospitals, nursing homes, offices, coffee shops, Tom discovered his life's mission: defend the rights of service workers who make the economy tick. To complement the commitment to economic and labor justice that runs in the Balanoff family veins, Tom earned a master's degree in labor and industrial relations from the University of Illinois. For decades, whenever his skills were needed to protect the rights of workers, you could count on Tom Balanoff to be there. He worked for the International Association of Firefighters here in Washington, for the Allied Industrial Workers in Chicago, the cement, lime, and gypsum workers in Kansas City. Then SEIU President John Sweetie discovered him, saw his exceptional talent, and brought him to Washington. Tom would go on to serve as trustee of John Sweeney's old SEIU local, 32BJ, in New York City. After a successful tenure there, Tom came back to Chicago, first as SEIU Local 46 trustee, and eventually as president of both SEI Local 1 and president of the Illinois State Council. Tom always has seized opportunities to help disempowered workers. In 2005, he traveled to Houston to help unionize janitors who were being paid as little as $20 a day. In the heart of one of the most anti-union states in the country, Tom secured a contract for more than 5,000 janitors that doubled their pay. Never content to settle, Tom kept the victories coming. A few months later, he helped thousands of janitors in Cincinnati, Columbus, and Indianapolis with a similar contract. It was a testament to Tom's lifelong belief that when working people of all identities come together, they can win. In the world of politics, my friend Tom has been a champion for the downtrodden. Several years ago, he helped launch the Progressive Caucus in the Chicago City Council, despite significant political headwind. Today, more than a third of the city's council members belong to that caucus. Perhaps the most consequential decision Tom ever made as a political change maker was in the year 2003. He was an early endorser of a community organizer running for the United States Senate by the name of Barack Obama. That endorsement helped pave the way for former President Obama's stratospheric rise in the world of politics. A few years later, Tom Balanoff became the first labor leader in America to endorse Barack Obama's campaign for president. At the time, Tom and I were part of the same lonely club. I was the first U.S. Senator to endorse President Obama's candidacy in 2008 and remained that way for 14 months. But Tom and I knew that President Obama was the leader our country needed. We had seen firsthand the amazing work he'd done in Chicago, helping displaced workers rebuild their lives and partnering with churches to launch job training. We knew that President Obama had what it took to unite our country. And without Tom's support, his candidacy may never have gotten off the ground. Tom says one of the leaders who inspired him most during his career was Nelson Mandela. A few years after the end of apartheid, Nelson Mandela wrote, "To be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others." Tom has dedicated his life to enhancing the freedom of others. He has stood for immigrant workers so that they could find a voice in the workplace. He has stood in solidarity with black workers, protesting against racial injustice. And he's worked to protect our communities and our children by demanding climate justice as well. In one of his last acts as president of Local 1, Tom helped make history again. He handed the reins of leadership of that storied local to the first black president of the SEIU Illinois State Council, Greg Kelly, a proven champion of working people in Illinois and across the country. And I might add that when I sat down for breakfast to congratulate Greg on this new opportunity, he reminded me that he'd once been an intern in my Senate office. I'm very proud of that. Tom Balanoff is leaving his post at a promising moment for working people. Since the beginning of the pandemic, service workers have come together to demand safer working conditions, higher wages, and better benefits. For instance, in December, workers at Starbucks in Buffalo, New York voted to unionize. It'll be the company's first ever union, and those workers will soon be represented by Starbucks Workers Union, an affiliate of SEIU. This moment is the culmination of Tom's decades of service to the labor movement. I want to thank Tom Badenoff for everything he's achieved for working families in Chicago, throughout America, and literally around the world. He's cultivated progressive political power and built a fairer economy that rewards hard work, not just wealth. Loretta and I wish him a long, joyous retirement with his wife, Hetty, and their 2 kids. Tom, I'm looking forward to seeing you someday soon in Highland Park. Watermelon juice on me. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Illinois.